So thank you, everyone. So I think we've got a really exciting panel this morning on sustainable pathways with really some fabulous speakers. So I will start off by introducing Peter Boonman. Peter is Global Technical Advisor on Innovative Finance for SNV, which is the Netherlands Development Organization. So Peter has worked as a bank manager in the Netherlands for 15 years before making a step into the NGO world, and really with a career in business development, program design, and today is the Global Technical Advisor for Innovative Finance at SNV in the Netherlands for the Netherlands Development Organization. And his passion is really on attracting more capital for investment into developing countries using innovative finance. So welcome. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Looking forward to discussing further. Then we've got Leonie Pence O'Connor. Leonie is with International Sustainability Lead and Global Practice Lead for Energy at AIMS International. And together with her team members, spearheads initiatives at embedding sustainable principles into the fabric of executive search and talent management. And she's the managing partner in South Africa since 2011. And so we're excited to have you join us on this panel, Leonie. So, and then after Leonie, we have Charles Buchanan, who is the Sustainable Finance Lead at Ernst & Young, Parthenon. Charles is a senior manager at Ernst & Young, SAT Sustainable and Lead Advisory. He has worked in development finance institutions, sovereigns, central banks, NGOs, investors, and comes with a wealth of experience in the sustainable pathway. So we're really looking forward to some of your commentary as well. And then we've got Harry Davies. So Harry, welcome. Harry is a principal at Kenneth, and where he helps lead the organization-wide strategy on impact management and pipeline origination. Kenneth is the Impact First single-family office of Diane Eisenberg and focuses on investments that benefit the underserved communities globally. And they prioritize investments that are of a catalytic nature and require some flexibility on returns and risk-return parameters. So looking forward to having you on the panel with us. So I thought that just to set us off this morning, it would be interesting just to hear maybe potentially from you, Peter. You can maybe set the global kind of macro picture and the role that FDIs, DFIs, NGOs, ODA plays in ensuring sustainable pathways for African development, and what kind of solutions you think might be, or innovative solutions we could all look at.
Yeah. Looking at macroeconomy and geopolitics is a little bit of a hobby for me, so that's why I thought to start with that. And actually, when I look at it, it's not really a pretty picture. We know globalization is coming to an end. Money is, production facilities are being repatriated to the West and the North. So that means that a lot of investment is also needed there to rebuild those facilities. And you see, for example, that in Germany, because of the price of oil, etc., whole production facilities, whole factories are being transferred to the United States, where power is a lot cheaper. Add to that that also the baby boomer generation has started to retire. So instead of putting their money in stocks and more, basically their risk appetite goes down. So they want bonds, they put their money on savings accounts. So that actually means that, and add to that one more thing, in the West and the North, each following generation, if we go from baby boomers to, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, each following generation is smaller. So that has an enormous shrinking effect on the demography. So it actually means that the money is getting scarcer, and that, of course, the cost of capital is then going up. And it also means that for investors, good returns can be made at home. So then why look at developing countries? So you see that there is, the risks are higher in LDCs and the lower middle income countries. And also if you look on the impact side, it's easier to make impact in, for example, decreasing greenhouse gases in South Africa than, for example, access to solar in a frontier state or a fragile state. The impact in South Africa will be quite larger. So what we see generally is an outflow, a net outflow of capital from developing countries. And at the moment, for this year, it's estimated to be something like $50 billion US. In Africa alone accounts for about 20 billion of that. So that is, when you're in development, not a nice not a nice trajectory and not a nice situation to be in. However, I need to add one more thing. You see that a lot of the ODA, the official development assistance, is being shrunk, and that, for instance, money for Africa has flatlined. On top of that, a lot of ODA is now being spent in country. On average, about 20% of ODA is spent within the borders of the Western countries. In the UK, where we are now, it's just under a third of the total ODA budget that is being spent in country, and that's because of refugees, etc. But that means that there is a lot less money going into Africa. It's not all doom and gloom. And I think we are here to also show some examples of how things can be done positively. Some things are outside our direct power. For example, multilateral bank reform is something that I think is very necessary. It allow these banks to use hybrid capital would be able to unlock something like $1 trillion US annually. So that could be hugely powerful. Debt relief for countries can be expedited. It's also something that can have a huge positive impact, not something that we necessarily immediately have an influence on. But if we see at the use of blended capital and the use of whatever ODA there is for de-risking investments, that is something that actually we can really work with. So impact investors have a number of tools that we can use for that. So blended finance, as I mentioned, is one. Also, I work for an NGO, and one of the things that we do also often together with DFIs is lobby governments to create a really enabling environment for investors, and there is still a lot to be done there as well. The use of digital creates or has the power to create a transparency in business that actually shows that some of the risk is perceived risk and not real risk. And the more examples we get of that, the better it will be for investment. Of course, there's also instruments like aggregation through making investments, for example, in microfinance institutions that then can trickle down to smaller players. And attracting funding for technical assistance and origination. I guess Harry will also be talking about that. For me personally, it is one of the means that proves really powerful. especially if you see that SMEs in Africa, they account for about 90% of the economy. 90% of businesses in Africa are SMEs, they need over $420 billion of investment annually. From the macro to the more practical, I wanted to give an example of a vehicle that SNV is, as development organization, is involved in, and I think it was a bit of an experiment, but it's really proving to be very powerful, and that is FMO, the Dutch DFI, and has basically set up a consortium with climate fund managers, whereby FMO and climate fund managers are the investors. And they use two NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, the Netherlands, and SNV, as the origination facility. And you can imagine for NGOs to work with DFIs, hey, you speak different languages, etc. It's not an easy journey, but we're now 5 years down that journey, and it is becoming really positive. So it also allows these NGOs doing the origination for the NGOs to have, because look, an investor is not an investor without returns, but an NGO is not an NGO without impact. So it allows a real focus on impact. We see the power of inclusion of vulnerable groups, of using a gender lens, and using nature-based solutions sometimes, it's called the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, so there is a huge focus on climate. About 75% of the investments are made into adaptation and 25% into mitigation. We started in 2019 with a 160 million euro facility for 4 years. That was completely used up, and now the European Community has signed with the consortium a guarantee for 105 million euros, which basically unlocks on the balance sheet of FMO another 240 million for the investment. And there is, we see a really healthy pipeline. Because maybe it's difficult to start working with each other, but once you get to know each other, appreciate each other, and know what's the investor looking for, then basically using both lenses, the investment lens and the impact lens, we have been able to establish a really good pipeline. And also we see as NGO that actually we have in 25 developing countries, we've got a footprint, we've got 1,600 staff on the ground. Actually, this is something that we can replicate, that we can expand as a means of originating really good deals. And if you hear investors in developing countries, it's often, pipeline. Yeah, that is what they say. We don't have pipeline, we need good projects. Well, I think this is showing a proof that it is possible through this collaboration to come up with a really quality pipeline. And I think that's a really positive story that indeed brings almost $500 million of new investment into Africa.
Peter. Yeah, no, sounds fascinating. So I think with that in mind, I'd like to pass the question on to Charles. Because Charles, I think you've had some real practical experience structuring some of these instruments. So I don't know if you would like to maybe provide everybody with an example of that.
Thanks, Jenny. So I was fortunate enough to be part of a project that was also spearheaded by climate fund managers a few years ago. And the aim of the project was to try and address, it was actually based in Latin America, but it's trying to address the same challenges we face in Africa. We've got a plethora of social, environmental, and financial challenges. One number that always sticks with me is something I read in an FSD Africa report a couple of years ago, that just to meet our NDC goals, Africa needs $2.8 trillion, and we can probably fund about 10% of that. And so the shortfall, we need to attract in. Peter's very right in saying that we're facing net outflows of capital at the moment, and as geopolitics plays out and I guess the world restructures its balance sheet, and so we have to come up with innovative ways to get that money back into Africa. And the biggest challenge, of course, is from the bottom up. You're looking for ways to de-risk your project or your business, whatever you're raising funding for. So what we designed is it was based on the expansion of the marine protected area around the Galapagos Islands. It was a government debt restructure, and it was funded via a blue bond. And we were quite fortunate in that the government bonds were trading at a massive discount. I think across the yield curve it was about a 45% discount, which meant that over time there was going to be quite a nice repayment of funds that could be put to work via trust into various underlying efforts in the country. But the key to unlocking it was being able to design an innovative funding solution to get it off the ground, because it was a great idea, expand the marine protected area, do a blue bond, fantastic. But that's going to take you 2 to 4 years. You need scientific white papers, you need government to buy in, you need the tuna industry, the prawn farmers, the tourism industry. There's a lot of lobbying, and there's a lot of work that has to be done on a political and on a financial level. And so effectively what we had is a hybrid blended solution. So hybrid in that the early rounds were effectively equity, so development equity, first loss tranches that could be plugged in, and if the project failed, then they're just not repaid. So very high risk. It was a very ambitious project. Ecuador is notorious for political instability. One of the numbers that stuck with me there was that since it became a democracy in 1830, the average term of a president or the administration is 2 years. So they would never, the chances are 50-50 that they would actually see out the 4-year term. And during the process of executing the blue bond, we actually did have a change of president and Minister of Finance and Minister of Environment. So all 3 of the ministries that we were actually dealing with. But fortunately, there was a lot of political will to get the bond executed. And but being able to work with development finance institutions, with a foundation, so the foundation that underpinned the transaction and funded the scientific work was the Pew Ocean Legacy Trust. So you've got grant funding from them funding the scientific studies. Then you've got, we had a consortium of DFIs that were led by the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development that could put in the early rounds of, I think it was about $3 million that came in initially to fund our legal fees mostly and some consulting fees to get the thing off the ground. And then that grew into later stages of debt. We managed to get the US DFC on board to write a political risk insurance policy, which helped to de-risk the blue bond further and attract the type of institutional lenders and investors we were looking for. Credit Suisse were the bank that underwrote it, and I think about a month before financial close we found out about all the troubles they were facing. So another curveball, but managed to, there was a little bit of a wobbly, but everyone decided that we were far enough down the line that we could get it done. And so I thought it's a great example of how we actually used a classic sort of infrastructure style capital stack to fund the expansion of a marine protected area, issue a blue bond, and then the real clincher for me was that not only did it reduce the cost of debt, I think the interest rate was about 9.5 on average on the debt that we took out, and we left them with about 6.5 we had managed to raise the funding at a much lower rate than that because of the USDFC's PRI policy. And a lot of the additional proceeds were channeled, after paying the lawyers and the bankers and everyone, into an underlying trust fund, which over time, by the end of the about 15 years in, it would be somewhere around $600 to $700 million, which could be deployed into conservation efforts, so buying Damen patrol boats from the Dutch government to protect the oceans, to look at data and AI-driven technical solutions to help to track the tuna fleets that are operating in the area, to help the tuna fleets to rekit the fleet with more modern tracking and more modern fishing equipment that is less impactful and has lower bycatch. And then the final thing was that they would actually be left with a fund that could be run commercially, and a portion of it would go into blue chip equities to keep on growing, to keep on funding conservation in perpetuity, and the rest could be put into commercial efforts in the region to help to grow businesses. So it's just a win-win-win on all levels, and it's an example of what can be done if you can find the right partners, develop an innovative solution, and buy yourself time to get everyone on board and everyone aligned. And I think that was we had to overcome a lot of hurdles in the process. But because of the funding stack we had developed, we had built enough space to give us time and money to be able to confront the issues that we faced. I think there was even a constitutional lawyer on board from Ecuador who had to change something in the Ecuadorian constitution to allow the transaction to be executed.
So do you mind me asking, how long did that take to put it all together?
So, look, technically it was 4 years, but we actually got it done in 2 because the Pew Ocean Legacy Trust had already funded the scientific white papers to justify the expansion of the marine protected area, and that was the longest process because when we started the Blue Bond, they had already been completed and were under peer review, which would take another 2 years.
Got it. And was it? And you got credit rating for that as well with the insurance from
Yeah,
DFC.
I think it got an investment grade rating because of the DFC policy. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think that brings me on to Leonie, because obviously these kind of transactions take a huge amount of resources, obviously both financial and human resources. And Leonie, I know this is your kind of skill set. So how do you find the skills, which they sound very sophisticated, to be able to implement projects like this? And I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I'm very impressed to hear about this. I actually went to the Galapagos Islands last year, and I think the one thing that struck me there is that certainly from an ecotourism side, which was a big part of hopefully what drove this. I mean, it's just if you've never been, it's a fantastic environment, and all the people working in tourism are locals. So this is the one thing that struck me, is that they were using Ecuadorian, they didn't bring people in cheap or whatever. They have a training program. So for every single tourist that goes there is a guide. You're not allowed to just go and trample around and sail around or do whatever. I think the sort of average ratio is there will be one guide for every 10, 12 people, and of course there's crew on the boats, etc. And these are all trained local people. And I think what strikes me about this project is that the humans drove it, right? So people like Charles, even the government in Ecuador, although they changed, probably political parties, etc., but there was a political will and a human will to actually make this happen. And that's what we say, people drive sustainability. It doesn't happen by itself, right? So when we look at these projects, we need to look for the leadership who will drive this. And we have one of our partners, in fact our Greek partner, always says that the biggest impact that we can make as an organization, we're across 60 countries, and we place leaders on a daily basis on an executive or senior management level. And the biggest contribution that we can make as an organization is to place leaders with a sustainability mindset. And if you if you have a leader in a business driving this, the organization just changes. And then you have things like green HR management that happens. People are being educated on looking after your environment. Things like job security, gender aspects become important. And the people are there. The people really are there. It's a matter of really looking for the right partners to support you, to find these leaders. We have a sustainability internal program in our organization. We've joined the UN Global Compact. I would definitely advise that every single company, doesn't matter how big or small, become a partner for the United Nations Global Compact, and they will give you all the information you need. All the training programs are there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. When you started, you think, oh my God, like this is such a huge, where do I even start? I can't make a change in the world. Mm-hmm. But sustainability is a moving target. So if each one of us make a small change by using recyclable materials, in our businesses, by working remotely, which I think a lot of us have done. We all flew across here, so we need to plant a lot of trees to make up for that. And I'm sure, there's some of you in the room who have great ideas about this.
You can sponsor my Specboom project.
Oh wow! Listen, I've planted loads of Specboom at my house already, so I'm ahead. Okay, we'll talk about that. I'm a big fan of that as well. Yeah. And maybe the next project that I have for you, I mentioned, is the source lakes in Angola. Yeah. That is just something that's very close to my heart. If any of you have read about this, Dr. Stephen Boyce is busy doing a lot of research there. It's the source lakes for all the big rivers in Africa, and the Okavango in Botswana is 100% dependent on this. And if we don't look after that, and possibly something similar like a green bond, looking after ecotourism, it's going to be an amazing. So if anybody in the room, have any ideas about that, I'd be very happy to hear. But it is all about the people who drive it.
Leonie, are you finding that you're sourcing talent abroad, or are you finding that there are the skills?
We have. So I always say I like to source local skills for local jobs. That is the first prize. There are obviously instances where we do the research and we find that this particular skill does not exist in our local market. That's when we use our cross-border collaboration with other partners. If we know, in fact, we recruited a ferrochrome expert recently in South Africa for Finland. And the whole family with their 2 dogs and children had to relocate to a very, very small, to Tornio in the north of Finland to bring across the South African skills. So we do that. But for Africa, and I'm very passionate about this, we need to transfer those skills. So when we're going to bring those skills into Africa, let's make sure we transfer it. Let's make sure that we have the right leaders with a sustainability mindset in place who are going to transfer the skills and upskill our people, because we want to keep it in Africa. We don't want to keep sending our skills away. We have diaspora coming back. We've had actually a wonderful example with, I think it was Frogfoot Capital. They actually invested in a software development company in South Africa in the InsurTech side, and we're looking for a senior manager, and I was, oh my goodness, where are we going to find this? It was very specialized, very high level, and lo and behold, there was a lady coming back, worked for Barclays Africa, wanted to come back to South Africa, for various reasons, and we managed to draw into that role. So there really are wonderful examples. We've got, I've been talking to African skills over the last 2 days here, and I'm really impressed by what we have got and what we have got to offer. So let's find the right partners to help us look for those skills, because they definitely do exist.
Great.
Sure.
So I'm going to segue a little bit to Harry now. So Kenya obviously works with the very important, as Peter pointed out, 90% of companies in Africa are SMEs. And so I know, Harry, that you do a lot of work with that, and you obviously look at the risk profile of these and how best to structure, in particular on the debt side. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about some of the structures that you've used to fund these sustainable pathways.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Morning, everyone. Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe to start off, I think one of the challenges for impact-oriented investors like ourselves, but also the development finance institutions, is they tend to focus on impact verticals. So they want to, include smallholder farmers in supply chains. They want to provide financial inclusion to households or micro entrepreneurs. They want to provide low-cost health or education. Very few are thinking sort of in a coherent way about job creation, I think, and we're part of that problem as well. But if you flip the narrative, what do most governments care about, and actually what do most people want? They want jobs. They don't want to be entrepreneurs. And I think there's a somewhat sort of lazy assumption that maybe the banking system will sort of serve this sort of morass of SMEs. And actually, that's not true here in the UK or in the US or Europe. That's often delivered by specialist sort of non-bank lenders. And it's definitely not true in emerging markets and sub-Saharan Africa. So I think something we've been spending a lot of time on is sort of finding either what are the pathways through the mainstream banking system to incentivize more SME lending. There's a whole morass of failed guarantee programs over the decades. But some more innovative things recently, I think, trying to sort of really unpack, what are the barriers to the banking system doing this? Is it risk? Is it transaction costs? Is it lack of knowledge? And trying to build more tailored solutions for that. So that's something we've been looking at a lot, but accepting that actually in the short term, what's probably going to drive innovation and delivery is sort of non-bank financial institutions delivering tailored services to SMEs. When we look at sort of, I guess, other accelerating frontier markets like India, that's what's delivering the innovation, and then the mainstream follows. And so I think we've been spending a lot of time trying to understand what are the specific sort of models that are showing some early traction on the continent to accelerate growth. I think there's a lot of great examples in South Africa and bits of North Africa, less so at any meaningful scale, frankly, and the whole wedge in the middle, unfortunately. So that's been, where we're spending a lot of time. And I think...
So on that, do you have some specific tools or products that you think work particularly well?
Yeah, I mean, I think our general view for this sort of missing middle of SMEs is for the vast majority of businesses, so much of the discussion here is about kind of high growth venture, right? Or private equity. And actually, most businesses will never get there. They probably don't want to get there, and they're going to be that bit of all economies that is a large proportion of enterprises and jobs. And so I think looking at models that are more tailored to that, maybe bundling sort of more flexible, sort of long-term self-liquidating capital, such as revenue share, that can enable SMEs to grow in a flexible, patient way, but not in that sort of high growth, like we need a liquidity event approach. So I think that's something we find really useful, as well as trying to take some of the, frankly, like quite boring financial instruments that are just so embedded in more mature financial systems, factoring, supply chain finance, asset finance, all these things that, any business based here in London would just take for granted that they need a new truck, you can get it financed tomorrow, right? You need to sell an invoice because you need cash tomorrow. There's endless ways to do that. It's just a question of how much it costs. For the vast majority of African SMEs, they're completely excluded from that. So we've been doing sort of investing in some wholesale capital providers with very niche strategies around supply chain finance. So a fund manager called AGC that's headquartered here provides wholesale debt finance to factoring or other sort of supply chain finance specialists, as well as investing in some more specialist, broader trade finance providers. And then I think also looking for some more kind of ground up initiatives that have emerged in specific countries, in East and West Africa. A good example recently is we invested in a business called Balloon Ventures, which had set up by a British guy, but he's sort of actually morphed out of a donor program initially, where they were piloting different mechanisms for sort of rural small business lending in Uganda. And after about 8 years, they seem to have finally found a formula that works. And while not necessarily like hugely scalable and profitable, if you were thinking of it as an equity investor in their business, if you can blend sort of their expertise, which is sort of very reliant on bundling a lot of like high quality technical assistance into those small businesses and improving them. And these are the sort of businesses that are left behind by all investment readiness programs that donors tend to find. You know, they're small businesses with maybe 5-10 employees in, you know, rural bits of Uganda. Most of us have probably never been to. And so I think those are the kind of models we think are really important. And then I guess the one other thing I'd say is, and we'll maybe come on to, we talked about blended finance and we'll maybe come back to it, is, you know, a lot of this stuff initially requires some pretty catalytic capital to pilot, test, probably requires more catalytic capital to de-risk some others after that piloting to get them comfortable. And then I think the sad reality, and this is true of a lot of the more sort of impact-oriented SME lending sectors in the US, in the CDFI industry, or the UK's CDFI industry as well, is it may require sort of embedded subsidy in the long run because there's a public good element of, you know, helping these businesses grow and creating jobs. And I think everyone should sort of acknowledge that reality.
That's great, thank you. So very quickly, Peter, maybe back to you, because I think we're running out of time. And I'd like to just leave us some opportunity with the audience as well. But is there a greater role that you think governments and DFIs can play in funding these different structures? Where are they? What has been successful in your opinion?
I think to be intentional about the use of ODA as a, how do you say that, as an enabler in blended finance, with ODA under such pressure, I think it's and you see that governments do pick that up, to actually not also diminish the amount of ODA to be used for de-risking.
And is that more creative structures like first loss structures that you could maybe bring in to crowd in? How successful have you seen that to crowd in kind of private into that region?
I'm personally not a specialist in carbon, to be honest. I think it definitely has its uses, but there's also a lot of pitfalls on the way. So I don't know, maybe...
I was going to say, Charles, maybe,
Charles could
maybe
speak
have you
better
got
to
some example
carbon.
very quickly.
Yeah, so look, we've started to use carbon credits, as controversial as they are, to try and unlock the potential of different opportunities. So I've used them in commercial firms to help to get that bit of cash, bit of equity onto the balance sheet so that they can get their debt funding. Because a lot of them have spent all of their money trying to get the business launched, and then they want to get a bit of debt to grow, but they can't get it because they don't have enough equity in the business. So if they have the opportunity to issue even a small carbon credit, you can get some of that cash onto the balance sheet, and it really helps the situation. The other situation is where your mate Steve was working. He's actually my cousin's friend. I found out this morning on the way to work. So he's doing a big study in the mountains around between Angola and Botswana, and it actually links up on a corridor all the way to Gabon, where I'm doing some work with another client to look at the potential for issuing government-aligned carbon credits, so ITMOs, which could be incredibly valuable. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that can be put to work to conserve nature and then to help to fund social impact projects and to help to generate new economies. In Gabon, there's not very much of a tourism industry. They've got amazing natural areas, but they don't have jeep tracks to take safaris through them. They've got more gorillas and more chimpanzees than the Congo and the DRC and Rwanda. So they've got fantastic opportunities. But to unlock these things, we need some innovative instruments. We've got to take advantage of what we've got. If carbon credits are going to get you the funding that you need, and you've got a legitimate case and you can issue a high quality credit, then I think it should be done.
Yeah, so I would concur with that. We've actually made an investment in an e-mobility company in Ghana. And really what changed that opportunity was the carbon credit scheme that they were able to access through a GTG program with actually the Swiss government, which actually provides them, just for their e-bikes alone, $35 million estimated in revenues over a 6-year period. So that was really a game changer from a risk perspective when looking at that particular entity from our perspective. So, and I guess, Harry, just very quickly, from your perspective, how do you see kind of these blended, does Kenneth actually introduce kind of more blended structures into their, into some of the structuring that you do?
Yeah, we do, and I think that can take varying forms, both just sort of adjusting pricing, but also significant risk reduction in different ways, or bundling things like technical assistance that can ultimately de-risk the whole portfolio. And I think particularly maybe coming back to the sort of SME finance lens, I think we tend to sort of like bucket all of this together often because it's simpler. But I think really stripping out like what are the sort of barriers to capital flowing to organizations? Is it risk? Is it capacity? And sometimes it's actually just transaction costs, and finding ways to either subsidize those initially or reduce them. And I think, the market seems to be getting much better at sort of parsing out those bits to make sure that the right kind of subsidy is applied when it's needed. And yeah, as for us, I mean, we're, as a family office, I think the most useful thing we can do is be a fairly nimble, flexible, and, investor. And so we can actually invest across sort of blended capital stacks depending where the need is, often trying to unlock maybe other more scalable actors into transactions, which, we can't be that scale actor ourselves, unfortunately. So, yeah, we try and sort of nudge models further where we can.
Yeah, love that. So I think with that, I'm going to, so before we just open some questions to the audience, won't you please just wait for a microphone? I think there's a gentleman here because we have online attendees as well, so they can hear.
Hi, my name is John Shikatana from Pangaea, based in Ghana. I have a question for Harry about pipeline building. Peter, also you mentioned the work that SNV is doing to build quality pipeline, particularly for SMEs, which evidently are often invisible, especially those maybe in the food and agriculture sector that are out in rural areas just running their business. Are we doing a good job of uncovering these SMEs and bringing them to the impact investors that might want to put capital into them? And if not, what can we do to build better quality pipelines and connect them to the sources of capital?
Nice, easy question. Yeah, I guess I would sort of actually turn that around and say, like, the answer is not large impact allocators investing in SMEs. The answer is building sort of localized financing solutions and investing in those. And so that's been a big focus of our and other work. If that exists today, put money in it instead of doing a direct investment. And as ticket sizes rise and you get into sort of medium and larger companies, like that's fine. If DFIs need to invest in those directly. But I think our general rule of thumb is like, is there a fund doing this already? In which case, invest in them. And if not, like, can we try and help build that thing, with partners? None of which removes the need, I think, for a lot of more sort of bottom-up work to try and improve the wraparound services that SMEs can access beyond finance. Where I think a lot of development and other programming can have a really important role in improving their capacity.
I think I'd like to add from the NGO perspective. There are lots of NGOs doing fantastic work, but when it comes to finance and working with investors, that is A, a bit scary, B, that is often a bit of an afterthought. And the thing that I really try to put firmly on the map in SNV when we design new projects is put finance central. Engage with investors at an early stage so that actually you know what the investors want and you can help through your TA the companies on the way to that investment. And I think that is, that's also a powerful help.
Yeah. And I would just add from our perspective, we actually see an amazing pipeline, but you do require TA to help build a lot of that because the financing that we can provide to SMEs is not sufficient to be able to build maybe that supply chain that they require for those entities as well. So really important.
You actually need a blended finance solution in like an accelerator program. Yeah. So we have to do pro bono work every year, and part of what I did was to provide some advice and guidance to some of the entrants in the climate finance accelerator program. And it was a fantastic program, but the only part that was missing is that there's no pool of funding there that they can tap into. They get pitch events, but it's a bit like speed dating in front of the dragons. It's so if we could design accelerators with a blended finance solution that underpins them, that would be the first prize. Yeah.
We use in our projects often result-based finance as part, indeed, of the technical assistance, so that results get rewarded with incentives, and that can be both in terms of the production and the economics, as well as impact incentives. So we do both.
So I know we're running a little bit out of time. Does anybody else in the audience have any other questions for our amazing panel? Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope it's been useful. And thank you, everybody, for your input. And here's to more blended vehicles to drive the SME sector and African sustainable growth. Thank you.